We have confirmation. Okay. The dulcet tones of the recording. Before I formally start the meeting, I'll go to each committee member to confirm that they can hear and be heard. This is a legal requirement for me to do so. So if you could verbally confirm that you are able to hear me, and I will confirm in response that I can hear you. Where practicable, please also have your video switched on so that you can be seen by the other members in attendance and the public watching. Councillor Christy Balderson.
Yes, I can hear you, Chair.
And I can hear you. Councillor Dave Bolter.
Yes, I can hear and see you, Chair.
Thank you. We can hear and see you. Councillor Peter Ginman.
Yes, I can hear and see you.
Thank you, Councillor Ginman. We can hear you and see you. Councillor Bob Matthews.
Yes, I can hear and see you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Matthews. We can hear and see you. Councillor Diana Toynbee.
Thank you, Chair. I can hear you and see you.
Thank you, Councillor Toynbee. I can hear you and see you. And Councillor Yolande Watson.
Good morning, Chair. Yes, I can hear and see you.
And I can hear and see you. I'd also like to request that the officers and presenters also confirm that they can hear and be heard. Chris Beard, Director of Children and Families.
I can hear and see you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Beard. Jackie Gooding from the South West Audit Partnership.
Good morning, Chair. Yes, I can hear and see you.
Paul Harris, Head of Corporate Performance.
Yes, Chair, I can hear and see you.
Andrew Lovegrove, Chief Finance Officer.
Good morning, Chair. Yes, I can hear and see you.
Caroline Marshall, Clerk to our committee.
Yes, I can hear and see you, Chair.
Thank you. Jen Priest, Governance Support Assistant.
Yes, I can hear and see you, Chair.
Thank you. And Claire Ward, Solicitor to the Council.
Good morning, Chair. I can hear and see you.
Also with us today, we have Kate Charlton, Deputy Monitoring Officer.
Yes, Chair, I can hear and see you. Thank you.
And I think, is it Gail Turner-Radcliffe? Have I got that right, from our external auditors? Grant Thornton?
Hi, Chair. Yes, I confirm I can see and hear you.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to welcome everybody to today's meeting. The Council is video and audio streaming this meeting live on the internet and making it an official recording. The recording forms part of the public record of the meeting and will be available on the Council's website. Please note that while it is only a legal requirement that you have your audio switched on, it is the Council's preference that where you're able to do so, you also have video switched on. Please remember what you say and do in this meeting has a global reach, and your words and actions should be chosen carefully. Can I also remind members to ensure that they're wearing their headsets while listening and speaking during the meeting if possible. This ensures the audio quality is the highest possible quality and background noise is significantly reduced. As these are extraordinary circumstances, there are some additional points for members and officers to be aware of. As part of our meeting etiquette and in line with our normal committee practices, all microphones apart from mine will be placed on mute at the start and during the meeting. I will run through the agenda in the customary way. When you wish to speak, please use the hand button against your name in the participants list, which should be on the right of your screens. I will then invite you to speak. Right. Okay. So, without further ado, just going to the agenda items in turn. Have we any? Sorry, so let me get the agenda up. Any, just trying to get to the first page of the agenda on my screen, which is not working with me at the moment. So I'll do it a different way.
Chair, the first item on the agenda is apologies for absence.
I thought it would be. Thank you. Right, I've got this now. Apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies?
There are no apologies.
There are no apologies present, so there will be no name substitutes.
That's correct.
Item 3, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? No, no declarations of interest. Item 4, the minutes, to approve and sign the minutes of the meeting held on 16th of June. Clerk, have there been any comments on the minutes?
No, no points of accuracy have been raised. Chair.
Raised, so they can be signed as and approved. Do I have everybody's agreement that those minutes can be approved? Do I need to call a vote on that, Clerk? No. Sorry, you're muted.
Sorry, if you wouldn't mind just going through the roll call, Chair, just to confirm.
Yep, I will do that. Councillor Balderson, in favour?
Yes, Chair, I approve the minutes.
Councillor Bolter?
Approved.
Councillor Ginman?
Approve.
Councillor Matthews?
Approve.
Councillor Toynbee?
Approve.
Councillor Watson?
Approve.
And I approve as well. Thank you for that. I'll take items 5 and 6 together, questions from members of the public and questions from councillors. I understand there are no questions. So we can proceed then to item 7, the corporate risk register. I think Paul Harris will be, Head of Corporate Performance, will be presenting this item, and I'm delighted also to welcome Chris Beard, the Director of Children and Families, who might be able to shed some light on risk and mitigation as affects the children and families corporate portfolio. Purpose of this item, just to remind and to inform the public, is to consider the status of the Council's corporate risk register in order to monitor the effectiveness of risk management within the performance, risk and opportunity management framework, colloquially known as the PROM. And we've got a couple of recommendations to consider following that. So, Paul, if I could ask you to introduce the papers.
Thank you, Chair. As you've identified, the report sets out the Q1 corporate risk register. That's the risk register as at the end of June. Within the appendices, then you'll also find the Directorate risk registers, the COVID-19 risk register, as well as the draft risk management plan. So the full corporate risk register can be found at Appendix 1. Within the report, we've provided a short overview of those risks. We have 3 extreme or red risks. Currently, we have 18 high or amber risks, 13 medium or yellow risks, and 1 low or green risk. This totals 35 risks at the end of June on the register. During the first quarter, there have been 2 additional risks added to the register. One of these is in relation to the repair of the storm damage following Storm Dennis, and specifically the potential financial impact for the council. And in addition, the potential financial impact of COVID-19 and the additional costs that we've incurred as a result of the pandemic. Within a number of the other risks within the register, there are a number of increases and decreases within the residual score of risks, and they've happened within the last quarter. Just a point of accuracy, it's been noted that on the heat map in paragraph 9, there is still reference to CRR36, which is hillside. That should no longer be on there, so just make that known to the committee. You'll find the full register in Appendix 1, and that doesn't refer to hillside. Also, at the committee's request, the COVID risk register can be found at Appendix 6. I think you'll recall last month's meeting, and we sort of informed that the COVID risk register has been held separately. This has been developed more of a project-style risk register to try and help and aid Gold Command to record risks in a more agile way. At the end of June, the COVID risk register holds no low risks, 3 medium risks, 3 high risks, and 5 extreme risks. Also for the committee's consideration is the risk management plan, or I should say the draft risk management plan at Appendix 7. This document will set out the detailed approach to risk and how that would be managed within the council. The intention is that that would be taken to Cabinet in September. So obviously at this stage we're seeking feedback on that register, on that plan from the committee. The plan to date has been informed by other areas of good practice, alarm guidance, and also sort of some of the feedback we've taken from this committee over the last couple of meetings. Intends to strike a balance between simplicity for managers in managing their risk, but also ensuring we strengthen specific points and we maintain robust risk management processes. And yes, I would welcome feedback on that, and perhaps between myself and Claire, we might be able to answer any specific questions on the risk management plan.
Thank you. So I'm looking at the committee. Councillor Matthews, you've got you're in first. So
thank you, Chairman. I'd either ask Mr. Harris or Mr. Lovegrove, excuse me, the 2 new issues raised, the storm damage and the COVID-19 funding issues. On the COVID-19 funding issues, recognising the immediate financial impact of COVID-19 pandemic. Can you tell us, are there any idea what sort of financial impact overall there is going to arise from that? And what steps are being taken to address it? And is it anticipated that there'll be any more government support for local authorities?
Mr. Lovegrove, I think he's got his thumb up.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Councillor Matthews. In terms of the COVID issues and the responses, the council, I think we've reported it in Cabinet and other areas, we are potentially looking at a further spend of between £5 and £10 million extra than we had planned, on top of the funding that we've already had from government to date. So we've just had 3 tranches of money from government, just over £13 million. But there is still further money due to us. We are still waiting for the further details from government as to the arrangements for support for the lost income. The details were announced a couple of weeks ago, but we're working with civil servants to understand how we will clarify and calculate the impact of that. So we are expecting more money to come to the council, and we are expecting more money to come for individual issues that we need to respond to. So I don't think the impact will be as high as that figure across the council, but at the moment we don't know. It's still a dynamic process, and we've had to make various assumptions about the future cost profile for the council, and clearly that is dependent on things like whether there's further outbreak, further lockdowns, advice and guidance around PPE and dealing with the GEM. So it is quite a dynamic position. We are being told that government are keeping this under review, so I think we will get further monies over the coming weeks and months, but I can't give you an exact answer as to how much or when that will come through. It's a question of we're in the hands of government going through. But from the council's perspective, we have a range of reserves and arrangements in place, so the council is able to fund these pressures going forward. So we're not in danger of running out of money on there. But clearly that is a budget pressure for the council. And when the Q2 performance report is reported to Cabinet in the autumn, there'll be a lot more detail provided about the financial impact of the COVID situation and our response as a council and the money we've had from central government and other funding sources.
Thank you. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. My question is also following on from Councillor Matthews' question. It's with regard to the budget for public health and COVID-19. This one's for you, Mr. Lovegrove, if you don't mind. Where has the budget actually been allocated and how is it audited? That's the budget for public health and for, because I understand that there's also another budget for the COVID-19 as well that's been given into the public health. Could you help me with those two questions, please?
Certainly, yes. We get an annual ring-fenced grant for public health matters, just over, I think it's about £8.9 million, which is to fund a whole raft of public health issues, which includes some of our responses to the COVID situation. And we've also recently received notification with another £840,000 to do with our outbreak plan and dealing with the responses. But it's a council-wide response to the COVID position. And the funding I mentioned in my earlier answer about that's come to the council for dealing with COVID issues. And we've had money given to us to pass on to the care homes that operate in the county. And some of that is being used to fund things like PPE. So in terms of the ring-fence grant, that there is an annual return that we send back to public health and they come and audit that and check that. So we're expecting that process to run as normal. The £847,000, I have to give various responses as the 151 officer, but that is a grant for the council to use to dealing with COVID arrangements. There is an outbreak plan that's being drafted and there is a resources section that will come along as part of that, so that will be part of that process. And I think one of the things that I think the committee may want to consider as part of its internal audit plan going into the future, what work would help to look at how we've dealt with the COVID situation. But we're in the middle of dealing with it at the moment, so I think that's something for a further meeting to have a conversation about.
Just if I may follow up on Councillor Watson's question, the actual budget for public health, is that that's not published in the budget papers for Cabinet or Council, is it?
Yes, I think the council meeting when it set the budget back in February, the papers there was reference to the ring-fence grant.
There's reference to the top level
yes
fund, but no reference to how that's split down into different departments or third parties, because I know quite a bit of it is allocated to third party organisations who provide the delivery of the services that the council's statutorily required to deliver. Is there a document that can be provided to the audit committee that details a more a finer detail of where that money goes? I'm not thinking of it as an ongoing issue, but I think Councillor Watson's obviously got a piqued an interest in how that money is allocated, and it might be useful to just answer that at this time.
Certainly, yes. I should say that a lot of the services that are provided or funded by that ring fence are commissioned by third parties, and that's the normal way of operating that the council has had for quite a while. In terms of providing analysis of that, and could I suggest that when we do the Q2 report to Cabinet, I'll give an undertaking to provide that further analysis in that report, so that then puts that into the public domain. And I think it's an important point that we need to make clear to the public where the money has been spent on the ring fence and the other spend on COVID issues.
I fully appreciate that you've got to report to trying to think who you report to. Do you report to Treasury on the spend of that money, because it is ring fenced? So there will be a report. Again, I suspect it will be at a higher level than perhaps Councillor Watson's looking for. But it would be interesting, I think, to see where the funding goes in terms of third-party organisations, what goes to the NHS trust, and who else is involved in delivering the public health services. Yeah. So if you're willing to do that for Cabinet, we'll be happy to pick that up.
Yes.
As and when. Councillor Toynbee.
Oh, yes, thank you. Just following up on what you were saying about budgetary pressures. I've just got a question about the cost of borrowing. Last year, the government put up the PWLB rate, and because we're going through this crisis, do you think they might put it down again? And would that make a significant difference? Because the government did tell us that they do whatever it takes to help us, but maybe that's one thing they could do.
That's a very valid point. The Treasury are, at the moment, they've just started a consultation process about PWLB, what it can be used for and the rates on that. So clearly government is minded to do something different. I don't know what they will actually end up deciding or what options they're considering, but as you say, at the moment, the cost of borrowing is very low. So who knows what they may do, but we don't know yet.
Thank you. Councillor Balderson.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a couple of probably some more high-level questions on the risk register. The first one is there's about 10 or so risks within the risk register, which are noted as further mitigation required. And I think we may have picked this up in the last meeting, so please forgive me if I'm rehashing old ground. But if you could refresh my memory, Paul Harris, that would be very appreciative. But they are listed as further mitigation required, and when I look at the actions, they're almost the same as the last risk report that we received, and then many of them are also the same as what was reported to us in the December 19 risk register. So I guess on the surface of it, it might appear that nothing's happening, which I'm sure isn't the case. So I just wanted to understand, as you're going through this revision of the PROM and the risk plan, is this something that will be addressed in the next risk register that we're going to see?
Thank you, Councillor. I recognise what you're saying there, and yes, I think there is definitely something about how we write the risk element and also embed that alongside service business planning to ensure that those further mitigating activities where we identify them are built into those key service business plans to make sure that they're really high on the radar. I think we draw reference to sort of smart actions on the back of these, and I think at the moment, if we're honest, if we look at some of those mitigating activities, they're not really that smart. I don't think they're that specific. I don't think they're that measurable. They haven't got timetables attached. So I think that would be the one thing. And then I think as we kind of write that into our standard practice, it provides a better basis for us to kind of question where those risks are within directorates.
Yeah, thank you, because I appreciate that some of them have been outstanding for a number of years. And I guess from an audit governance perspective, it's difficult if we're looking at the overall process to get that level of assurance. So I look forward to seeing the next draft of this plan. My other question relates, there's a further 5 risks that I can see have increased their risk rating. For example, CRR 37 in relation to land supply figures has increased from 9 to 12. But I don't see a great level of detail around an explanation around why it's increased, nor any resulting actions coming out of that increase. So I've got 37, number 3, number 9, number 15, and number 7. Is there any comments you could potentially provide us on those?
I'm still on. I can certainly, tried to test with a couple of directors yesterday around this area, and certainly I know some of it will be a reflection of the changes in relation to COVID. Where timetables will have been pushed back by a couple of months, and kind of the residual risk or been associated with that. But in terms of specific risks, it would probably something I would have to take back and liaise with the directors and the risk owners specifically to address those.
If I come in, I think it'd be very useful and helpful for the committee if there was just even a bullet point or one line to say why the risk has changed, or why the mitigation has changed, because it just raises the question in everybody's mind, why? And there is obviously a reason why, because the numbers wouldn't have changed otherwise. It's reasonable to just pass that information on so everybody's a little bit more the wiser. I've got three hands raised at the moment: Councillor Watson, Councillor Ginman, who's next, and Chris Baird. Chris, I'm conscious. Did you want to come in on any of these points, or do you want to come in on something that you're raising?
I was following up with Councillor Balderston's point, really, and
so I'll bring you in now. Yeah,
is that okay, Chair?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, as part of the management board, we do review these overall, but from my directorate's perspective, we have monthly budget and performance meetings where we go through the risk register and look at the different risks across the directorate, really following the PROM that you've got as an appendix, and we have different risk owners, and those risks, broadly speaking, where we can't contain them within the directorate, that then moves into the corporate risk register. Some of them, I can understand Councillor Balderston's point about they appear to be long-standing risks that don't seem to change in terms of mitigation and action, and that's because we are living with long-term risk. Not to downplay that, but for example, the human rights claims, we have some cases that were highlighted a couple of years ago now, and then there are other cases which we acknowledged at the time, where looking back over historic practice, there may be further human rights claims, and that may happen on an ongoing basis as matters come before the courts and things are considered in that way. So we can mitigate things in terms of practice now and improving practice and training and development and supervision and those kind of things. But at the same time, there is history, and when things considered historically, that could result in some human rights claims. So in my view, it's right that still continues, and that would be something of in essence living with risks that are there. The same in some respects is true of the budgets and savings for Children's Directorate. That's not to say there's a tremendous amount of work not going on in relation to that, and things like the Edge of Care service that the council's now invested in and put in place, and that's up and running this calendar year, that wasn't in place before. So actually, in terms of a mitigating action, that's a positive step, and we can report on that, and will do in terms of its effectiveness. But the budget pressures overall are still there. Andrew Lovegrove will be able to talk more clearly, I think, about how budgets are set out for this financial year. But the budget setting process, we arrived with Children's Directorate with a balanced position at the start of the year, based on what we knew then. Obviously COVID has come in, and so there's all sorts of other pressures and different ways of accounting for the current resources in the council. And then over time, over the past few years, under both administrations, actually, there's been, a corporate response to the risk of a spend greater than plan to children who were looked after or who have care experience, and that again, things like the Wide Marsh development, where we've bought a property and putting forward supported accommodation locally, there's been a lot of activity going on about that, and that is now operational. That will reduce some spend that we would have otherwise had, but still, the pressures on that budget are significant. There are national issues around supply of placements and the cost of placements. And I think it was 83% of all local authorities last financial year spent more than they planned for looked after children. And I think, there are a number of actions that we can take, and things like refreshing and looking again at our recruitment for foster carers, investing and making more effective early help. Those are activities that are going on, but still, in terms of a plan against budget, that is a high risk, and it's managed corporately, so that where there is an overspend on that compared to the plan, that is then picked up corporately, and that's how we as a council have managed that risk, over a number of years. So I think there are some of those things where there are some long-standing issues where one would expect them to still be on the risk register, and another one would be around the recruitment of social workers. We have made strides in that. It is in a very difficult market. We still have some teams where there's 50% agency workers. The good news is that our caseloads have come down a lot over this last year, so teams are reporting they have more manageable work, but still, in terms of the proportion of permanent staff in our teams, it's we want to achieve better than that, and that's why the risk is still there. So I hope that gives some flesh to some of the comments in the rows.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Baird. Councillor Balderson, did you want to come back? You have content with that?
I'm not arguing that the risk should or shouldn't be there. It's just from an audit governance perspective. If we're using this to provide assurance, we don't see in the information that's provided to us, we're not seeing all of this activity, and nor do we need to see all the detail. But I think I'm certainly not arguing that the risk shouldn't be there.
No. Okay, thank you. I'll move on to Councillor Ginman, who's been patiently waiting.
Oh, fine. Well, I was going to back up Councillor Balderson's question, and I'm grateful to Mr. Baird for his comments. I do find that one of the dangers with risk registers, not just here, but elsewhere where we're using them, there is a great tendency to think, right, we've written it all up, we've found the risk, and sit back. And there is this danger that the further mitigation required, which is the point that Councillor Balderson has pointed to, and I would, is actually our duty is not only to ensure that things have been found, but they're actually being dealt with, and having some sort of sense of timelines and activity. Indeed, as indicated by Mr. Baird, it is really important, because there's danger otherwise. We think, well, that says further mitigation required. Okay, what does that mean? When by? Who's doing it? How much is it happening? And when do we see that risk removed or reduced? One naturally gets alarmed with the number of extreme risks or high risks. And that leads me to my second question, really, in a way. That is, how does this, I'm sure Mr. Harris is probably well acquainted, but how does this compare with other counties and other ones? I mean, are we sitting here looking at exceptional risks, which you've mentioned, which aren't happening in Cornwall, that aren't happening in Derbyshire or whatever? How do we get the sense that we should be comfortable living with exceptional risks? If I was in a business and somebody turned up to me and said we got an exceptional risk, I'd be quite concerned and wanting to know how quickly we were going to mitigate that risk, reduce the risk, or reduce the risk completely. And I do find myself slightly concerned that sometimes one's looking at these and seeing red where I would not wish to see it.
Is Mr. Baird, are you able to answer that one? I suppose to put some context to that, if we looked at, say, the ongoing risk of recruitment of social workers, that that was present, I suppose, when I first joined the council 5 years ago. It's still present today. There's been a good deal of what we might term as mitigation. In other words, we've done all sorts of things in terms of enhancing the packages and trying to bring people on board. But we still have that area in the red. Is there ever going to be a time, I think, following from what Councillor Ginman said, when we can see a way of getting that recruitment and other issues, but I'm just zooming in on that one because it's one I'm familiar with, out of that red sector? Is there anything that this council can do to mitigate, which will provide that going into an amber or green, or were you telling us that as a public body, as a council, we are just going to have to live with that risk because we cannot affect the outside influences which are causing it? Does that make sense?
Think it does indeed, Chair. I think that there is things we can do, things we are doing, and there is more we could do within a very challenging environment in terms of recruitment, both recognising our location and actually, you know, the lockdown and people being able to work remotely has provided some opportunities, but a fundamental part of social work is being and seeing children, you know, and that's not something that we're currently expecting people to do totally remotely. And in fact, for children where we have concerns, we have carried on seeing them face to face. So in terms of geography, you know, we do still need people to work and be able to work with children locally and see them. But it is in a challenging environment. There are thousands of vacancies for children's social workers. It's a hugely valuable profession for us as a county and as a society, but there are issues of supply and demand. We are focusing on recruiting and retaining our social workers, and we're putting a lot of effort into further recruitment, newly qualified social workers, and then providing them with a good working experience and support around that. Things like low caseloads will help, but this is something that will take quite a long period to change. It is changing, but it is slow. And we need to keep at it. And in my view, it will take over successive years. It's not something that one would resolve within a financial year, to be honest with you. So I wouldn't want us to think that, well, there's nothing we can do about it. There it is. That's not it at all. And actually, there have been some really good improvements in that regard. And you know, creating the conditions for good social work to flourish is one of the phrases, and that depends on a whole range of things. So I think the council's taken some positive steps with that, which is good. I think things that one might not initially think of. So the council's invested in greater legal support. And you know, we've got some more permanent staffing focusing on children. That's been fantastic, and supports good practice as well. So there are things outside of the directorate that do support that, but it is something that we will constantly have to work on, in my view.
And I think that's another illustration that the risk register, being a fairly blunt tool, doesn't really recognise some of those other activities, and that if we dived into any of them, then we'd find, I'm sure, work going on underneath. I've got two hands up. Councillor Watson's first, and then Councillor Matthews.
Sorry, Chair, if I may just interject. Some of the work is obviously more detailed, so it's contained in action plans or improvement plans rather than in a summary sentence about mitigation in a risk plan. So there's probably something about linking the risk register to action plans that look at it in more detail. And for example, for children, we've got the Safeguarding and Family Support Improvement Plan, which goes to children, young people scrutiny and goes to Cabinet on a quarterly basis. And that has a lot more detail in a number of areas. So it's that kind of understanding of the flows of it, really, isn't it, I think? Apologies for interrupting.
No, that's fine. Councillor, did you want to come back on the point you'd
Yes.
raised? Yes.
Yeah, no, I did.
I'll allow you
on
to
the
interject
second
then.
point. Sorry, on the second point, which was the one of comparison, is Hereford unique in having these sorts of risks at the levels it's carrying them? I think it's quite important to understand that if other counties are managing to control them, we want to know how they're doing it. Therefore, a comparison seems to me to have some validity. I realise circumstances may be different, but overarchingly, it would be useful to know. It might be something that Ms. Gooding from SWAP can help us with, or whatever.
Right, I've got lots of hands up. Two officers, Paul Harris and Claire Ward, both got their hands up. Do you want to come in on this point, Claire? So I go to Claire first, then to Paul.
It was just to confirm. I think that's a really valid point, and as we're at the point of reviewing the risk management plan, I would suggest we do that annually in the corporate centre.
Good. Yep. I think the committee would appreciate that. Paul, you wanted to come in on that point raised?
Yes, if I could just add to that. Certainly, having looked through other authorities' corporate risk registers, we have to understand the context in which we're comparing people in. So different people have different escalation processes, different scoring mechanisms, of course, which would flag them at higher risk, lower risk relative to us. But certainly I know when I look through the risks that we're carrying, there are a lot of fairly general ones that, the vast majority of local authorities are carrying. There is a lot of comparability there. And in terms of high, medium, low, from what I've seen, I don't feel we look out of kilter, but, obviously if we do something about an annual review, and I think we've talked about an annual review against, say, a national risk log as well, to kind of pick up those potentially emerging themes on a national basis. I think that's something we can do in the corporate centre to kind of bolster the process as well.
Thank you. So now I'll move to Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. Just before I go forward, I just wanted to say thanks to Mr. Lovegrove as well for taking forward my couple of points around the COVID-19 reporting to Cabinet and into the internal audit. Thanks for that, Andrew. That's really great. Again, my question is for Mr. Baird, and I'm really sorry, it must feel like you're on the hot seat today, and I don't want to put off any other directors coming to the Audit and Governance Committee.
No, that's quite all right.
But it's great to have you here, actually. Thanks, Mr. Baird. And I was really glad because you did answer a couple of my questions, because I'm new to audit and governance, and I'm still learning 1 year in, being on the committee. When I'm looking at the adults and families risk register, I see 35 risks, but within children, the children and families, it's 8, and it's kind of like understanding why that is. And so I was really glad, because I really like your idea about how to look at the action planning and how that links with the corporate risk register, with the risk register for children. And because you've answered my question about safeguarding, my other one was around special needs and fostering. I know that you mentioned about fostering, and where is the is fostering again one of those action plans that's taken through other committees, or how we, do you see where I'm going with the question? It's trying to understand the reporting. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question, Councillor. In terms of our our recruitment of foster carers, we have recently reviewed that. We have a sufficiency strategy and also an annual report on fostering. So actually, Children and Young People Scrutiny considered the report this week as part of the consideration of our corporate parenting strategy. And that indicated that we have been trying to recruit foster carers, but we aren't recruiting them at sufficient rate to match the need. So there's some further work now being done on what more can we do. So actually, we should be putting that more explicitly in our risk register, rather than, a catch-all around operational workforce. So I think that's something that I was reflecting on, as part of that process and with scrutiny. And the plans then will form part of the work of our improvement plan and scrutiny in looking at that. And it may also feed into the budget and performance report for the council, if there are financial implications, for example. So I think, again, it's about tying consideration of the risk register in with the reflections and plans going forward, really, and recognizing that we do need to update and keep these as live documents. I think that the number of risks, as you say, do vary by directorate. And again, I think that's something we as a management board can do, just to have a look at how we reflect on how many risks we identify and in what way. It may be that different areas have different levels of risk. Do you know what I mean? But for example, every day, our council services around the risk to children, that is a daily consideration on daily cases, whether children have experienced risk of significant harm or are likely to. That's something that our children's social workers and our staff look at on a daily basis, and that's their work. But we haven't put that explicitly in this risk register because that's a different order of things, really, if you see what I mean. That doesn't mean to say people aren't working through and managing risks, but that's different to the level of risk and the risks identified in these risk directories. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, is this okay, Chair, just to come back?
Yeah,
that's great. Thanks, Mr. Baird. And so when you're looking at taking it back to management board, as we were just talking about the fostering, adoption and fostering, and about how it aligns with the action plan, what would be the next step? So you'll be taking it back to the management board, raising what we've been talking about, this morning, and does that mean that the risk register for children's would be reviewed, and that we might actually have more risks identified by aligning those action plans? And
well, certainly in terms of how we use the risk register, as I said, as a directorate, we review our risk register every month. So that's an opportunity for us to add. That's something that I'll be doing. We had a meeting last week, so the next one will be in August, and then as risks arrive, we'll look at adding those as we see fit. And I think with my colleagues, Mr. Ludgrove and Ms. Ward, we can look with Paul Harris to look at management board and think, a bit more explicitly about the number of risks by directorate, and what does that tell us when we look across, because that's a prompt from the committee. I mean, I won't, that's an action I can take back as a director to raise with that. So that would be something, because as you say, there are different lengths of them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, thank you very much. It's just understanding the process for me. Thanks, Mr. Baird, but thank you for your patience. Yeah, thank you.
I've got Councillor Matthews, who's been waiting a long while to come in. So, Councillor Matthews.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. First of all, I'd like to fully concur with the comments made by Councillor Ginman. They're very valid comments, and it's something we should be addressing on a frequently. Why I want to ask Mr. Baird is this recruitment of social workers again. Mr. Baird, you will recall that I sat on an employment panel just over 12 months ago, and we agreed to bring us in line with other authorities. We agreed substantial lump sum bonuses, housing benefits, and all sorts of other perks to help to recruit social workers. Has that worked, or is the situation still the same?
Overall, we are recruiting people to posts. So we have some newly qualified workers that are joining us, and we continue to do that. But we still have a number of vacancies, Councillor. All of them are filled by agency workers, from the information I've had recently, but we still have a number of vacancies that we are still trying to fill permanently. We will always have some turnover. So that's part of staffing and sometimes a healthy staffing position, but we do want more permanent staff than we have now. So it is improving, councillor, but it has made a difference, I would say, but that it's still an issue for us, and particularly recruiting large numbers for us in Herefordshire, large numbers of experienced and qualified staff. That is a challenge. We are more successful with newly qualified staff.
Well, I think I got this right. Didn't you have a system, or were you open to implement a system of training your own local social workers? I think that's the case. Can you update us on that?
Yes, you're right, Councillor Matthews. We have an apprenticeship scheme and a number of staff who are meet the criteria for that. I don't want to use the word unqualified because they have a range of skills, but they're not qualified as social workers. We have a number of staff who are joining the apprenticeship programme and some that are just about to go on their first placement. So yeah, that is part of what's taking place in Herefordshire across children's and adults social care services.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Balderson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I really do appreciate the discussions that we've had so far, Chris, particularly around following on from Councillor Watson's points. One of the things that I wanted to get a better understanding of, because I'm not, as with Councillor Watson, I'm relatively new to Audit Governance Committee as well, and I don't have a particularly strong background in children's and family services. So, so for me, it is quite a learning curve. When I did look at and talking about comparisons with other councils, I have been looking at other areas, other councils, and some of their other councils do things very differently, and some of them report having sort of a lower risk appetite for when they're looking at their risks and the mitigating actions that need to be taken to get that risk to an acceptable level. Some of them do have a lower risk appetite in the Children's and Families Directorate. So I just wanted to get your feedback on that. I think it might be slightly different to the way that Herefordshire Council do look at things at the moment. But given Councillor Watson's point in terms of commensurate with the activities that you undertake and the budget that you've got, and looking at how other directorates are reporting and managing their risks. I just wanted to sort of get your thoughts on that.
I think, Councillor, so if I'm understanding you right, your question is about whether we are perhaps underplaying risk, is that, or comparatively, or in relation to the council, in relation to other authorities?
Sorry, Claire, did you want to come in, or is that a point to make on that?
Only because I've drafted the new revised plan, and I think what Councillor Bolden is saying is that we don't recognise children's services as a specific risk in itself. So if you look at the actual impact of risks, we look at budget, we look at disruption to services, but we don't actually look at the impact on children, if I'm absolutely honest, do we? If it's not there within our proposed risk assessment score, and whether it should be. Happy to take that away to consider, because actually we may say that should be, woven in to our risk appetite.
I mean, I thank you, Claire, and Councillor Balderson, I didn't mean in terms of the use of the word underplaying to be kind of pejorative in any way. If you see, I would welcome that as a director for children and families. I think an explicit recognition of the impact for children and young people would be very appropriate. We do consider things about budget and reputation and impact on services, but actually impact for children and young people would be really appropriate. I think there's we do live with risk and uncertainty, in a number of areas of children's services, and that reflects what's happening for children and families in society. So but also I'd be keen to look and learn from any other authorities that do approach this in a different way, and I think that's part of the revised review arrangements that Claire Ward has just mentioned, I think.
I suspect that I mean, I often the risk, the management structure and the risk report should, in a normal organisation, feed into the high level strategic management of the organisation and the commitment of resource to deal with those risks. I think the underlying it's perhaps a confusion we have is that we don't see it reflected in the risk risks at the moment. What we would instinctively determine to be the level of resource that's possibly required to be invested in the children's area to mitigate. So a higher level of reported risk might instill a different approach from the allocation of resources. I don't know. It's not really our role to judge that, but I think it's our role to question how this report is used by the senior management team and by the executive to develop a response which is reflected within the budgets to try and, as well as all the other things the budgets have to do, deal with statutory requirements and deal with issues as they come up. They also need to try and address what's most serious risks which face the council and thereby the county. And I suppose that's a lot of words to describe. We don't think it's quite right yet, but I think we're getting clarification of where we need to go, and I hope what I've said sort of makes some sort of sense to yourself, Mr. Beard, and to Andrew as well. I mean, it's where you direct resources. You've got to have a reason for directing them. If there's no risk in an area, why would you put more resources in there? So if you've got a higher risk, you would tend to address it. I'm noticing we've got more hands still up. So Councillor Toynbee, then Councillor Ginman.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's very useful to have this focus on one directorate. So I really welcome that, and it's very good to hear that so many committee members take an interest in children and families. So if you'd like to know more about the plans, you're very welcome to come along to Children and Young People Scrutiny, performance challenges, etc. So moving from the Corporate Risk Register to specifically the Children and Families Risk Register, which is Appendix 3, which I'm sure lots of you are on, but just for people listening, that's Appendix 3. Two of the risks on here are Ofsted related, and I'm glad to hear that it sounds as though Ofsted is going to become a little bit more flexible in relation to COVID, make a few allowances, which is good news, and frankly I hope they'll make some fairly large changes to how they operate. So we've got two Ofsted risks in this register, number 9 and number 5. So it would just be helpful, Chris, if you could expand on them a little bit. Number 9, the sentence doesn't actually end. And number 5, significant budget implications is always one of those phrases that is sort of sounds a bit like a euphemism. Significant is quite a strong word, and yet it's not in the corporate risk column. So I'd be grateful if you could expand on those two. And finally, just to say that I really welcome what Claire said about building risk to our children into our processes. I really support that.
Right. Did you want to come back on that, Mr. Beard?
Yes, I was just trying to find the mute. Sorry, just in terms of the mouse. Yeah, sorry, councillors, that the wording has been cut off. It was trying to reflect the preparations for an Ofsted inspection and separating that out from Ofsted outcomes. But I think the preparations is everything there, and are Ofsted able to carry out an inspection or a focus visit effectively? We have over the past, so CF05, I think really, but they that approach I mean last year 2019 we had 2 focus visits from Ofsted, and in 2018 we had a full inspection, and in terms of being able to facilitate and be open and transparent and have all things there for the Ofsted inspections and focus visits, that was fine. They've always commented that has been run well. In terms of the outcomes, it was to reflect that if we were inadequate, in particular, then that would have significant issues in a whole range of ways, obviously for children and families, but also for our own services that may need to be realigned, changed, and for the council as a whole, because generally speaking, if a local authority does become inadequate, that then follows with significant public money being spent to improve things. And typically a local authority that is judged inadequate by Ofsted does find that a lot of staff leave, and that the spend on agency staff, for example, really increases, and there's often spend on other parts of the council as well to support things in that. IT is sometimes spent, legal services, HR, a whole range of things. So it was to try and recognise that in the risks, and so that's why those are there. I recognise that they could be worded more accurately, I think, and have the full wording obviously in the box that you can see.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Councillor Ginman, you have your...
Yes, I just wanted to come back on the comments that you made a little while ago, and which tend to support you in the regard that the risk register, when one's looking at from a business, is what's the actual risk to the business. What we've got here is always goes beyond that. It's what's the risk to the people who we're serving, and it's how does the business of being a council actually serve those people. And actually capturing that, I can fully understand, is really difficult. But I think with Mr. Baird's director, it's a very obvious example of where the risk to the individual may be if we cannot make that work properly internally. And therefore capturing it as indeed the solicitor of the council made the point of trying to do a little bit more with regard to children. It's absolutely right, but it goes broader than that. We also need to think in just that same way with regard to some of the adults under our care, with regards to other aspects of what we do, and making sure that risk register has that broader application, which might not apply in any other sphere. It's a sort of unique nature to which the risk register's there. And I think that may need a little bit more thought. And perhaps it's something which we as a committee can assist those who are doing the work on this. It might be something we would like to take away and think about in the future.
Thank you for that. Yes, indeed. Councillor Balderson.
Thank you. I've just got one other question on the corporate risk register, and moving away from you, Chris, back to Paul. It might be something that you can perhaps give us an update on, because I don't expect you to necessarily have the answers today, but just looking at the overall process in terms of how risks escalate and de-escalate off the corporate risk register. I just wanted to talk about EP 27 on the economies in place risk register, which is in relation to the Hereford Transport Strategy Review. And
which appendix is that? Sorry.
Good question. Caroline, are you around economies in place appendix?
Appendix 4.
Yes, Appendix 4. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the Transport Strategy Review, the risk around the review is not concluded to provide a clear basis for decisions on future strategy. I appreciate in sort of the draft corporate risk register, it was listed initially with an inherent risk rating of 25. We don't necessarily see the inherent residual risk ratings in the directorate risk register. And I appreciate there's been a number of delays around the strategy review. And with its initial risk ranking of 25, I was hoping you might be able to come back with a little bit more information around that risk and why it was in the draft process was thought it should be on the risk register, but through further discussions was then dropped back down into the directorate risk register. Because I don't fully understand with the details that are in the directorate risk register, I'm not fully understanding what the risk is.
Okay. I'm certainly, I can take it away and link with the directorate, the Director of Economy and Place. I mean, certainly it was highlighted initially with a high score, I think, as you identified, of 5 by 5. And then obviously we've released it for the pre-meeting or the, that meeting. Because of the timing, what we did is we had a further conversation then with Richard to review that risk and effectively to moderate it.
That's Richard Ball, the Director of Economy and Place.
It is, yes, yeah. I mean, I had a quick conversation with Claire, and I know, sorry, Claire, Claire, you had the conversation with Richard as well. So I don't know if you might be able to provide further light on that one, but certainly something we can perhaps take away.
Yeah, I mean, basically I did step in to moderate it as the new plan. So it's a risk that they're aware might materialise, but because it isn't going to, it's not likely. It's, it needs more work. So I think it was an early indication of a potential risk, but it hasn't materialised, which is why it didn't come forward.
So possibly the scoring originally was a little bit too high, and it brought it forward too quickly.
Yeah.
So no hands up now. That's good. I was going to move on to any questions on. I know we've sort of dealt with some issues to do with the risk management plan itself. Just before we leave the risk management lists, there's one factor, one issue has come to my attention in respect of an absence of general scrutiny meetings since the lockdown started. Would that be something? I presume that's something that would come under the monitoring officer's remit. Is there a risk to the council in not having general scrutiny meetings? Would that, we were going to come on to the draft annual governance statement, would that affect the draft annual governance statement for the current year? I'm just conscious that other than the chair of general scrutiny jumping up and down, I'm not sure of what other mechanism there is for ensuring good governance in that respect. So I was just going to raise that, Claire, if you want to come back on it.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You're quite right to raise it. So it would sit within my service risk register. It doesn't at the moment because we're taking steps to resolve the matter. So it's a COVID-related impact, and steps are being taken. So it was raised at management board with directors. There's now going to be a meeting with directors and the statutory scrutiny officer. So I think if it continued, it would be something that would come up at my next service management team meeting, and it may go onto the register. But at the moment, I don't see it's one as being appropriate for the risk register. But you're quite right; it could at some point, because it would mean, lack of accountability, lack of progress, then has budgetary implications, etc.
Yeah, I mean, it's really it's a lack of scrutiny. And it affects from an audit and governance point of view, it affects the way that we can give governance assurance to the council that things are in place to work properly. I just wanted to raise it during this meeting. So going on, I don't know if people have got, committee members have got other comments to make on the risk management plan itself. I would like to just congratulate officers on producing what is a very readable document. I particularly like the hyperlinks, which when I tried them all seem to work, which is always the danger with hyperlinks in documents, I know. I open it for any comments or questions from committee specific to that framework. Councillor Balderson, you're first in.
Thank you, Chair. Just a sort of a high level question first, because I understand this will form part of the PROM, and you're hoping to have, is it the risk management plan and the PROM that will be going to Cabinet in September? And if that is the case, will we get an opportunity to review the PROM prior to that point as well? Or are we now going to be out of sync?
Hi. The way I see it being structured is you've got the PROM, which is the overarching document, or I think we'll refresh it to be a performance management framework. So I think it's a bit more, what it says on the tin sort of thing. But we'll have the overarching performance management framework. I think we see it as a very high level document, effectively a one-page view, so we can kind of get that read and embedded, understood by officers across the council. And then we've got then the lot more detail, which is in the risk management plan. So at this stage, I would say all of the detail about the risk management being in the risk management plan. The PROM itself, or the PMF, will just be a very high level document, effectively. I was going to say taking some of the images and the flows in here, but I think we've stripped them out, so we need to make sure we get the right images in there, but putting them back onto that page. So it will just be very much a reflection of what's in this plan. We might be out of sync for committee meetings, but potentially we could look to just share what that high level PROM looks like outside of committee.
Yep. I would find that very useful, just because essentially is the umbrella of what we are looking at today. And I get some more detailed questions is really around the escalation and de-escalation element, and probably my the escalation now within your framework is for any residual risk score of 16 or higher would then be escalated on the corporate risk register. So if I look at the current risk register as it is today with the current rankings, that we currently have about 35 risks on the corporate risk register. By introducing your escalation process in this draft, it would reduce the number of risks on the risk register to 8, and which is quite a dramatic decrease. Not saying that that's good or bad, but what I would like to understand is you chose not to escalate risks that were certain and significant or likely and critical, which in your plan would have a residual risk score of 15. So I just wanted to get a better understanding on your thoughts over that.
Yeah, so what we haven't done yet is obviously use this process that is proposed to see what it would do, because I think the whole process would work from service level up. So I couldn't say it would end up with 8. It might actually end up with more. So I think that's the first thing. But in relation to where to set the levels, I think it's a difficult one. What I went with was, which one did I go with? I went with almost certain. So not because I thought that fair chance was, well, it's still 50-50. So basically almost certain and major, but I'm happy to relook at that if you think that's not the right level to go with. It was just really looking at, yes, this is certainly going to happen in the next 6 months. So that was the one reason. And then the long-term impact. So that's something corporately, which is difficult to deal with within a directorate. So that's then raising it to that corporate level.
Yeah, because I know in your when you're addressing the risk or the impact of the risks, there aren't any sort of financial definitions at the moment. So, for example, at the moment, I don't know if something is ranked certain and significant or likely and critical, whether, and this might be a question to the other audit committee members, whether would you want to see those risks or whether you're happy with the current structure. I'm not saying it should be one way or the other. I just wanted to understand the background to the decision.
And what I've tried to do is to link it to the finance procedure rules, so everything makes sense. We're not setting different levels. So basically, the significant of impact is things that a director themselves can via between lines, etc. But once you need to involve the Section 151 officer, that becomes major because it has an impact on someone else's budget, basically. So that's what I've tried to do, rather than put in those financial limits.
That makes sense.
It might be helpful. I mean, I like the brevity in a way of the document. It might be useful to have one or two little appendices, more work, but perhaps one with sort of the assumptions as you stated them, so that everybody can understand what's meant then.
That could be more explicit, I think. I think it could be more explicit. Yeah.
And the other thing is there might be a worked example in an appendice, so that you can see the process in action, as it were. I'm not suggesting they form part of the document itself, but I'm aware that this document's going to get given to people with this is our prom. You'll need to know about this, but with the best will in the world, other than a 10 or 15 minute quick chat, that's probably I'm being realistic. Sometimes what people will get, whereas if there's an example there, it's always you can work. Oh yeah, well I kind of it puts more meat on the bones of the document itself. I understand what you mean by critical in these terms. It might help. It's personally what I'd hope to see. Yeah. So we've got Paul Harris and then Chris Baird.
It's just quickly to add to Claire's comments there. I think when you kind of do that direct comparison to go 16, all 3 risks would carry forward onto the new risk register or something like that. I think the conversation myself and Claire had was probably shifting some of those thresholds on those scores a little bit more. So what was formerly a score of a 4 may now become a 3, or probably the other way around, actually. What was formerly a 3 becomes a 4. So that would change where those potential, post-mitigation scores fall out. So it may not be as kind of clear cut as today is this, tomorrow would be that. We'll have to do some of that rescoring through services. And I think that's Claire's point about the service risk registers then being really critical about getting ourselves into that new world environment.
I'm just conscious whether we should give some recommendations to effectively to record and affect what we've just been speaking about. In which case I'll try and formulate something, and then we vote on it so it's recorded. Would that be helpful? I'm looking both at Claire and Caroline.
Yes, please. I think Caroline's keeping a note. Hopefully,
I've realised she's keeping a note. It's just that if we're making a recommendation that we define the risk criteria more overtly, or words to that effect, I think we capture what the spirit of the committee is saying. I've got Councillor Balderson's hand up and Chris Baird's hand up. Chris, I think you were first.
Yeah, and it's quite mundane, Chair, but if you wouldn't mind, I'll give my apologies because I'll be joining cabinet briefing. Is that all right with?
Absolutely fine, and I just reflect the comments made by all committee members that we appreciate you coming and joining us, and your views are been very useful to our consideration of the matters under discussion.
You're welcome anytime.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Balderson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just had another question around addressing the risk. Just reading it as if I was sitting within the business and I had to implement the policy. You indicate that reduce requires steps to contain the risk to acceptable levels. And so I just wanted to understand what an acceptable level would be, because with our discussions earlier with Chris, an acceptable level in children's might be very different to an acceptable level in corporate services, for example. So I just wanted to get a better understanding around that.
Yeah, I think that can be made clearer. What was meant there was acceptable level in relation to impact. So it's going back to what the impact would be. So, for example, if it was significant, you're going to want it to be reducing to minor, but it will depend on what you've identified as what the risk was. Does that make sense? So so what's acceptable will be specific to the risk, and it's about therefore reducing it to something that then you would mean you'd be able to accept it.
Okay, but that makes sense. But in one area, you may not necessarily need it to be reduced to minor. I'm not quite sure whether that may or may not be the case, but yeah.
And I would hope with how we've done the scoring now is that those wouldn't become significant anyway to need the reducing action. Fingers crossed.
And I think with examples as one of our recommendations, I think that will further illuminate how it all works. And
yeah.
If there was an example potentially from each of the directorates, because they do work very differently, potentially, that I think would be very helpful.
I also think it's a good idea because although this is the theory, what we actually need to do before we go to Cabinet is how does it work? What does it mean in practice for actually a management board and those managing risk? So I think actually we should be doing that anyway as part of our, is this the right thing to implement?
So, Caroline, do we have a recommendation captured that I can put to committee? I suppose it's something along the lines of the committee requests that the risk criteria are better defined and explained in the document, and the committee requests that an appendix include a worked example from each of the directorates. Does that capture essentially what we're looking for as an improvement? And it's already a good document, but I think it could be made more user friendly even.
And Chairman, if I could add, I think Paul mentioned earlier that that they were going to focus a little bit more on smart actions as well in terms of mitigating those risks. So having that built into the recommendation, I would appreciate that as well.
And how would you propose to do that?
Well, I'm not quite sure whether in your examples you're also going to give an example of how the corporate risk register should be written up or how their directorate risk register should be written up. Because if there was 2 line items or something of the corporate risk register, you could then, through that structure, clearly demonstrate that they need to consider the smart actions, and the same with the directorate register. So it may be through the examples that they also provide examples of the reporting. That might be, you may not want to do that because it might then limit any changes with it being a working document, but it could be a starting point.
Yes, so the worked examples include the use of smart recommendations or stuff. Yes,
Smart mitigating
smart
action.
mitigating action. Yeah. Including the use of smart mitigating action. So,
and I think, sorry,
yeah.
Mr. Chairman, and also I think, I don't know whether we need to say we support the activity that the corporate team would undertake to put it in practice before it's finalised. So to work through the examples of various areas, I think that's a very good idea, because it may bring out things that they're just not aware of. So I would certainly endorse that activity.
I think that's a separate recommendation, isn't it? That we would recommend that the corporate team work through examples with the directorates prior to any implementation in order to verify the approach. Would that be that? I think that would be prudent and helpful. I'm getting some nods. Yeah. So Caroline, have we captured those recommendations? Does everybody understand the recommendations I've put together? So we've got a recommendation that we define the risk criteria better within the document. We've got a recommendation that we provide an Appendix C with worked examples from each directorate which reference smart, what was the words?
Mitigating actions.
Mitigating actions. Thank you, Vice Chair. Smart mitigating actions. And a further recommendation that the corporate team work through with each directorate examples in order to verify the approach is appropriate and correct. Sorry, Caroline.
Those recommendations are fine, but you did earlier on in the meeting also request that an annual comparison was done against other local authorities, and I think you need to capture that one as well, so that it's reported on an annual basis to this committee, so that you can further assure yourself about the risk registers. Right. In which case, yes. Can we include that? Now, do these recommendations that we're making, who do they go to in terms of? Do they go to the corporate team or do they go to Cabinet? Because Cabinet's receiving this report.
Yeah.
Just want to clarify that.
So to begin with, they'll come to us as officers in preparation for then onward transmission to Cabinet.
Cabinet, okay. Because obviously one of them is an ongoing obligation for the annual review. Can I take the recommendations en masse? Are we content to do that? In which case I shall again just ask each of you if you agree with it, agree with those recommendations. Councillor Balderson.
Approve.
Councillor Bolter.
Approve.
Councillor Ginman.
Approve.
Councillor Matthews.
Approve.
Councillor Toynbee.
Approve.
Councillor Watson.
Approve.
And I approve as well. Thank you. Councillor Watson.
Would it be possible to have a comfort break, Chair?
I would be happy to introduce, what shall we say, a 10-minute comfort break? Would that be okay for everybody? We've got other items to continue with, but I'm sure we can. I am conscious of time, and I'm waiting for a voice to say that we're recording live. Is that right? Yeah. Thank you. So we are resuming our meeting of Audit and Governance on Thursday, the 30th of July. And Councillor Ginman.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I was just reflecting on where we were in our recommendations, and we hadn't moved on to the next item. So I hope you'll allow me just to suggest that we needed to put in amongst those recommendations that further consideration with regard to the welfare of children and of people under those adults under our care should be part of the risk register, not just in terms of the ability to provide the service, but actually going broader than that. The care of them should be specifically something that is put into our risk registers. I will look to others to perhaps improve the wording, but I hope that seemed to be an important point that had come out of our discussion, and I would like to feel that we make sure that gets carried forward.
And thank you for that. I think Claire Ward, you did pick up on that issue as the discussion went through. Do you have any? Would you like to suggest some words that the committee could include as a recommendation, so that we capture, you know, the service users as much as reputational risk and financial risk to the council? It's the risk to the service users.
I think the recommendation may be along the lines of that the impact of the risk to children, young people and vulnerable adults is expressly included within the revised risk management plan.
Good, thank you. Councillor Balderson?
Yes, and one thing I'd like to add, if possible, because one of our recommendations was for them to go through the directorates and put it in practice and make sure that it works. Perhaps tag on the end of that if any other, if anything else comes out through that practice run, that potentially that's considered to be added as well, because there might be other areas very similar to children and families or vulnerable adults that would be very relevant to help officers apply the framework, which we haven't discussed today.
Yes, thank you for that. So,
sorry to make it more complicated.
I could come back and ask you for the precise words you'd like to tag on, but to add and other service users,
or
that
maybe to consider
identified.
And consider the outcomes of the dry run, or whatever you Claire, would that be an appropriate term? Consider the outcomes of the dry run and whether any other elements of the council need to be considered in the impact statements.
Yeah, so to ensure that any other relevant impacts are accounted for when the risk management plan is trial run or something. I can't remember what word we use then, but I think we all know what we mean now.
Yes, there's an outcome from the trial runs.
Yeah.
Okay. Caroline, I don't know if you captured that. Yep.
Yes, I have, Chair. Yeah.
Okay. So is that what we do need to actually ask for another vote? Councillor Bolson, you've got your hand up again. Is it something you wanted to add? No. So I'd be obliged, Caroline, if you just read out the recommendation, if you've got it.
So I've got a new recommendation, which is the impact of the risk to children, young people and vulnerable adults is expressly included within the revised risk management plan. And then we are adding to the activity recommendation, which will be along the lines of, if there are any other areas which are identified, they are expressly included within the risk management plan in line with the children, young people and vulnerable adults wording.
Thank you. So Councillor Ginman, you're happy to propose that as a recommendation?
Yeah, very happy to take that forward. Thank you.
Shall we just vote on that? Councillor Balderson?
Approve.
Councillor Bolter?
Approve.
Councillor Ginman.
Approve.
Councillor Matthews.
Approve.
Councillor Toynbee.
Approve.
Councillor Watson.
Approve.
And I also approve. Councillor Shaw. Thank you for that, Councillor Ginman. That's useful to pick up that that additional point. If we now move on to the next item in our agenda, which is the draft annual governance statement. And I think presenting officers will be Claire Ward, Solicitor of the Council, and Andrew Lovegrove, our Chief Financial Officer. Just to remind committee and anybody listening that the purpose of this document is to seek the views of the committee as to whether draft annual governance statement 2019-20 properly reflects the risk environment the council is operating in and the appropriateness of any actions required to improve it. This council is required to publish a statement annually which explains to the community, service users, taxpayers and other stakeholders our governance arrangements and how the controls we have in place manage risks of failure in delivering our outcomes and reflecting our particular features and challenges. The draft statement is attached as Appendix 1 and sets out the arrangements we have in place, the outcome of an initial review of their effectiveness and actions we are now making to make improvements. And the draft was to be published with our draft statements of accounts in 2020, in June 2020. And I believe that has already been done. So Claire, is it yourself or is it Andrew that's leading on this one in terms of presentation? I've got
Andrew.
Andrew, right, thank you. I've got Councillor Ginman's got his hand up. So Councillor Ginman, do you wanting to?
Oh, sorry, I was just going to point out one aspect of this, of the document where on page 4, where there's some error in the language and it just needed correcting if it was going to be a published document. Page 4, the bottom one paragraph, the annual code of conduct. There's an error, 2 errors in that. It says the committee on standards, and I presume that's standards in public life. It's missing the in public, if that's my interpretation. And the second was that each compliant, which I think is meant to be each complaint or each complaint rather than compliant. But those are just matters of for publishing an editorial.
Thank you. Yes. I think a number of grammatical errors had been picked up. I was going to ask that the clerk and officers ensure that the published document is amended to reflect a better use of English in where grammatical errors have occurred. Mr. Lovegrove.
Thank you, Chair. As you explained, this is the draft annual governance statement. It is now in the public domain. And in normal times, this would be the meeting where you would agree the final version, receive the final audit report from our external auditors, Grant Thornton. Clearly with the COVID, it's all rather different this time. So the plan is for your November meeting to receive the audit report and for you to agree the final version of this annual governance statement. So there's a little bit longer for people to review and comment on it. Everything is on track for the audit work to be completed for that November date, and this document here is open now for the public to comment on and for views of the committee.
Thank you. Other than grammatical errors, does the committee have any comment that they'd like to make in respect of the document? Again, I would just comment that I'm pleased to see the way it's, apart from the grammatical errors, been produced and follows you know, a very user-friendly presentation with the hyperlinks, with a lot of references that take you on to other documents within the council's scope. I do hope all the hyperlinks works. I haven't checked them all. It's always a a vexatious moment when you press on a hyperlink in, and it's happened to me in many documents from the government and various other places that you find that links out of date or something. So just to be aware of that. Councillor Balderson, you've got a point you'd like to make.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I have to endorse what you've said as well. I found that the document was quite easy to read, and I really appreciated all the hyperlinks where they were. And actually, I probably learned a little bit more about the council than what I had previously known, having read through that document. So I thought it was very well presented. The one question I had was in relation to Appendix 2, the Annual Governance Statement Action Plan for 1920. There are a number of orange statuses within that, and I just wanted to double check that everything that was orange in Appendix 2 has been carried across, I'm assuming has been carried across into Section 6 of the document Improving Governance Actions for 2021. And just as if that is the case, just as an example, the first item in Appendix 2, which is orange, is implementing training re-employee code of conduct. So could you point me in the direction of, first, is that a correct assumption? And two, if that is a correct assumption, where I would see that particular orange category?
That is a correct assumption. I'm struggling to find the link where it is because obviously it's a slightly different format, but that was the intention. I think Claire.
I can tell you, yeah, that entirely is the assumption. If I take you to page 68 under Section 6, you've got decision making. It says produce new toolkits and provide remote training for members and staff.
Okay, great. And because I also note that in our action plan for the committee, there are a number of changes that will be made to the new action plan in terms of looking back over the last 3 years and tracking the progress. So I imagine we'll see that when we get the detailed format of what's in Section 6.
If I just clarify further down, just to make sure I haven't, because there's that action, but there's also under HR policy and recruitment, which is the second page, it says implement training re-employee code of conduct. So Assistant Director of People and myself have got both those actions in relation to staff training.
Thank you.
Just while we're on the Annual Governance Statement Action Plan, on page 73, which Appendix 2, Section 4, page 73, we've got an amber against, I presume, as was then the Acting Director for Economy in Place. That is now, because it's a historic document, that's right, but it is now the Director for Economy in Place. But the update is outstanding. Is that something that we would expect to see? I'm not sure whether that's been, how have you managed to take that back into the, I haven't looked in the document itself, but if there's an update outstanding, how have you managed to take the action back? Am I making myself clear? Is that? It said review partnership governance arrangements between
Bear
council
with me
and
and I'll find it.
bodies.
It's
If
the
it's
same
been
point,
taken,
Chair. I'll just find it for you though to confirm. It's about partnership, so it should be there.
It caught my eye because the status was action out. You were waiting for presumably a response from the Director for Economy in Place in respect of what was happening.
The partnership framework on page.
Yeah, it's now come to me. So to do all of it, rather than it just be one action on its own, it's now going to come into all of the partnership work that needs to be completed. And then we've also got the Director of Economy in Place has it, the last item on Section 6 table, higher education bodies, review partnership governance. So that will just come together then.
Fine. Okay, thank you. That explains that. Are there any other comments from committee? So I have to get a touch screen because this is driving me. I'm just looking for the recommendation that, so we've got no additional recommendations. We simply recommendation open to us is committee determines whether the draft annual governance statement at Appendix 1 properly reflects the risk environment the council is operating in and that the actions identified are an appropriate response. Is everybody content with that? I'll take a vote as per usual. Councillor Balderson?
Approve.
Councillor Bolter?
Approve.
Councillor Ginman?
Approve.
Councillor Matthews?
Approve.
Councillor Toynbee?
Approve.
Councillor Watson?
Approve.
And I also approve. Councillor Shaw. Thank you. So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda.
Councillor Shaw, just before you move on, can we just check that Councillor Bolter can still hear us, because he switched his video off and I don't know if that means he's got technical difficulties. Ah, perfect. Thank you, Councillor Bolter.
He did reply to the roll call, as it were. So thank you for that. So we now come to the progress report on the 2020-21 internal audit plan. And we've got Jackie Gooding from the Southwest Audit Partnership. Thank you. Have we got? No, we don't. Oh, yes, we do. Yes, you're hiding amongst the crowd there, Jackie. Thank you for bearing with us this morning. Perhaps you'd like to just, introduce the report and any comments that you'd like to bring a committee's attention to. And then I'll ask Mr. Lovegrove if he's got anything to add.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, apologies, members and officers. I did miss most of the discussion around the risk register. Unfortunately, my internet went down this morning. I don't know whether to blame True Speed or GigaClear because they're both working in the village at the moment. But I'm back online now, so hopefully I'll be able to stay back online. So members, this is the first progress report for the 2021 internal audit plan. Progress against the agreed plan for 2021 is not as expected at this point in time, with only one audit completed and 2 audits at report stage. Since writing this update, one further audit has been completed and the remaining audit at report stage is waiting for management responses. The audit completed is the Troubled Families Q1 Claims Grant Review. I'm pleased to report all families included in the samples for April, May and June were accepted as being valid and there were no findings identified. I should also point out that there is an error in Appendix C of the report on page 102. The Halo Financial Review has been included, but in fact it was a 2019-20 audit review, so it will be removed as I report to you in my next progress update, but it will be reported as part of the annual opinion in September 2019-20. As a committee, you'll be aware that I reported in my annual plan in May. It was expected there would be some disruption to the 2021 internal audit plan, which would result in the need to review and reassess the plan. We've progressed 4 additional pieces of work as a result of new or changed processes due to COVID-19, and 2 additional audits requested by the Chief Finance Officer. And these audits are detailed on pages 85, 86 of the plan, and the additional audits on page 95 of my report. On page 86, I've also provided for you an update on the outstanding 2019-20 audits. You'll remember from the last meeting that we had issued a number of reports, but due to officers being redeployed and working particularly on delivering in relation to COVID-19, we did not push the management responses for those reports. A lot of those have now moved forward. There are still a couple that are outstanding, and we are working hard to make sure that those are finalised before.
I think Jack is frozen there at the moment. We'll give her a moment. In the meantime, Andrew, I don't know if you want to add anything while Jackie sees whether she can rejoin us.
So what I was going to say, Chair, was that the SWAP team have been very active during the period. I appreciate, as Jackie was saying, that some of the audits didn't happen according to plan, but we've used the SWAP team very extensively on a range of counter-fraud audits we've done on the grants that we've been paying out to businesses. So we've paid to date just over 5,000 grants out to various businesses using the national schemes, and we've taken full advantage of all of the counter-fraud arrangements that have been put in place, and they've changed extensively over the lockdown period. So there's much greater connectivity with government departments, so accessing the Spotlight system, and greater working across a number of agencies to deal with identifying fraud and sharing intelligence and the like. So it's not that the team haven't been busy, but they've been very fully deployed on that important work on behalf of the council and the government.
That's good to hear. I know Jackie's left the meeting. I'm hoping that she's trying to re-engage with us. The issue of fraud, I know that you'll be bringing you've offered to bring some training to committee later on in the year, which I think will be welcomed. We'd also obviously like to hear, in terms of the counter fraud activity, as to whether that's using is it the national database, or using a number of databases, that public money has been saved within Herefordshire, and no doubt Jackie will be looking to, within her report, provide an indication of the success of that. But I think the public generally and council will be interested in understanding how successful or not that has been. Jackie, welcome back. I can see you're there now. I didn't know whether you'd come to the end of what you were saying, or whether you were just drawing breath for a few more remarks.
Thank you, Chair. No, sorry, my internet went again. Apologies about that, but I've reconnected, so fingers crossed. I had nearly come to the end of my summary, yes. Just also to say that the summary of audit opinions and recommendations on pages 93 and 94 will be updated as audits are completed, and will provide a more meaningful summary in future reports. To move the 2021 audit plan forward and to start to progress audits, I have had meetings with both Director of Adults and Communities, Children's and Family, agreement that some audits that can be progressed. Audits have already progressed for the Corporate Centre and for Economy and Place. In conclusion, to update the committee, the audit plan for 2020-21 will be reviewed with the Chief Finance Officer to assess the impact of the COVID-19 work requested and additional audits, and I will bring a revised and updated plan to the committee in September. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. So I turn to the committee. Have you questions on the report? I've got Councillor Ginman.
Can I just fact that various audits have not of themselves been completed or been able to be undertaken? Does that in itself constitute a risk? And can you quantify that risk? Is this just, in other words, one of process, but doesn't carry with it, in your view, any greater risk? But then that questions why we do it. So I'm just trying to sort of get a sense of the value and the importance of it not being able to go ahead at the speed it should do.
Thank you, Councillor Ginman. Yes, ultimately we would obviously want to issue a audit report and get management agreement to the recommendations within a very short time frame. And we do have time frames for that within our reporting process. Obviously, the audits for 2019-20, there has been an impact on officers' ability to respond to some of those recommendations. But as I say, we are progressing as much as we can to get those finalised. What I would say is, yes, obviously, we'd like the recommendations accepted as soon as possible. But we will be monitoring all those recommendations throughout the year, particularly the priority 1s and 2s. And as you know, you receive updates on progress against those. What we're lacking at the moment is actually not the agreement necessarily to the action, because the draft report does give an agreement at that stage, but it's the action the officer is going to take to implement that recommendation.
Can I come back with a second question, if I may?
Yep.
While you were off air, or offline rather, there was a bit of a discussion about the problem of fraud, simply being the number of amounts of money that indeed the 151 officer has had a responsibility for, and ensuring that payments were made by the council. And the issues that relate to that, they are both fraud directly, but also the question of cyber fraud also emerges. And I just wondered, in doing these assessments, to what level the cyber security aspect of the risk is being managed and or audited, as that's a very specialist area.
Thank you, Councillor Ginman. Yes, you're quite correct. The council have received significant sums of money. We've been involved with certainly looking at the business rate grants and areas of fraud within applications. And we're also looking at a number of other areas where there is a requirement for the Chief Internal Auditor and Chief Executive to sign off a return to say that the money has been spent in line with the criteria for which the funding was provided for. And we have a number of those that aren't reflected in the plan at the moment, but will be when I bring my update in September. In relation to cyber fraud, yes, you're quite correct, certainly a high risk area. And there is an IT audit in the plan this year to look at cyber security, and that will be carried out by one of our qualified IT auditors.
Yeah, I think that is good to hear. It's also worth bearing in mind that predominantly the council's IT regime is contracted through Hoople, and it's one of those IT audits that, in fact, you I think, if I understand it right, you will be auditing our subsidiary, as it were, but we as a committee will take confidence from the fact that our contractor is being effectively audited by you in that sense. Is it, am I appreciating that in the right sense, that it is effectively not just Hoople, but but because the IT is run under contract through them, and a number of the activities are run by them in terms of bill payments and receipts, that it is predominantly a Hoople audit, as it were, but nevertheless instigated by ourselves and reporting to Andrew Lovegrove and thence to the committee.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Shaw. That is correct. The audits that we carry out that are services that are provided by Hoople to the council, we do on behalf of the council. But you're quite correct, we are auditing that service that is provided and looking at the controls that are in place. And our report will go to the council officer so that they can ensure that any recommendations within that report are actioned by the client, so by Hoople.
Thank you. In respect, I mean, I'm hoping, obviously, that report comes and doesn't find anything of any significance. But looking to Caroline and possibly to Claire, we have, I think there are 3 directors of Hoople. We've got Richard Ball, the Director of Economy and Place, David Hitchener, Leader of the Council, and is it Andrew Cottam? Should there be any issue, would this committee be able to ask them to join us for a meeting? Would that be appropriate?
Honestly, Chair, I'd have to think that through. I'm not going to give an answer
That's
now.
fine. I'm just giving you some advance.
Yeah.
There are a number of issues. There are a number of audits that we will do which will involve Hoople. But we have a contractual relationship with Hoople. And I'm just trying to understand where the board of directors for Hoople sit in relation to the governance and scrutiny committee's work.
Yeah, they're a separate organisation, obviously, as a company, although controlled by the council. My initial reaction is that your role would be to the commissioners of that service as to what's going on, rather than to Hoople itself.
That's fine.
So that would be council officers who are commissioning those services.
One of whom is a director of the organisation. Yeah.
I mean, I can advise we are reviewing, the Hoople arrangements at this time. You've seen that in the annual governance statement.
They've often been reviewed. I'm aware of that, and understand the reasons why. But it's just to try and drill into where the line of responsibility runs. I've got 2 other hands up, so let me stop talking and I'll pass to Councillor Watson and then Councillor Ginman.
Thank you. Sorry, I thought Councillor Matthews was before me, but I still got that wrong. Mrs. Goody, I'm really sorry to ask this, and it's following on from Councillor Ginman's point about because of the impact of COVID and the risk becoming the risk, is that I note on page 96 that there are discussions with the directors of adults and communities and children and families about the audits being carried out. And I'm really sorry if I've missed something, because when you look at Appendix C, which is page 99 to page 103, it's quite overwhelming with how many audits you actually carry out, which is incredibly admirable for your team. But how, because of the impact of COVID and because of the team has been spread out and now regathering, how are the audits being prioritized about what gets done before everything else? And I'm not sure if I've picked that up within your report, but would you give me grace to explain how that process is carried out?
Yes, thank you for your question, and it's a very, very good point to make. In relation to the 2021 audit plan, when we did the original planning, we obviously look at the corporate risk register and also the operational risk register to look at the areas that you may want to include in the plan for 2020-21. We also hold meetings with the various directors and their management teams, also understand where they feel their risk areas are as well. And from that, we then draw up a plan. We do risk rate the audits in our audit automation system. So there is a risk rating within there, but it's our interpretation of the risk rather than necessarily the corporate, what it may say in the corporate risk register. In relation to the 2021 plan and the review of the plan, the meetings that I've held with the two officers so far would indicate that the audits that are in the plan, we can start some of those audits that were originally planned. However, there are some audits where there has been possibly work carried out that it would be better for us not to audit at this point in time. So when I sit down with the Chief Finance Officer to go through the 2021 plan, we'll be looking at all the areas, particularly also areas related to COVID-19 and the risks that the Council may face moving forward, and looking at where potentially the audit resource should be focused in relation to the remainder of the year and in delivering audits, obviously, to provide assurance to the Council and to yourself as members, but also making sure that we can deliver adequate audit work to give an annual opinion at the end of 2020-21. So I'm very happy to take on board any comments that the committee has in relation to audit areas. And certainly we can have those on the table when I have that discussion with the Chief Finance Officer.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Mrs. Gooding. I was particularly interested in the risk rating, you know, how you, you know, because it's a whole series of different conversations. So that's where I was quite interested to find out, you know, how you do those risk ratings. And I've got a bit of understanding that you're looking at the risk register, you're looking at the pressing issues within the directorates and from the financial officer as well. So, yeah. But thank you very much, because yeah, it's incredible to see how many audits are actually carried out. So thank you.
Yeah, a lot of work gets done. Councillor Ginman.
Yes, thank you. I was going to come back on the comment and noting the solicitors wish to take away the particular item and think about it. We do have quite a few new councillors. And whilst I respect your position as chairman, you will have understood and gone through many times the relationship between Hoople. For some, this actually starts to sound, shall I say, somewhere where we would want to really do understand the governance structure, because the risk, as has been identified and agreed by our SWAP colleague here, into the cyber area is of significant importance. And we really do need to understand how any audit that is undertaken, even if it is of a subsidiary, how that plays out in terms of ensuring that the council is indeed getting not just best value, but actually best security. So I think I'm urging that there should be some sort of report coming back to this committee at some point in the future on this relationship, so that we can have the assurances that at the moment I'm not sure that I feel comfortable that I have in that regard.
Thank you, Councillor Ginman. I think that's the point well made. I'm aware of that there is other activity apart from audit that looks at cyber security, and I well know the manager responsible and the team to a certain extent that carry out our IT and corporate communications function. it's one of those areas that's totally in the back room until something goes badly wrong, and then it's suddenly front page news. And bearing in mind what's happening in the world at the moment, I think you're absolutely right to be cognizant of the risk that's associated with that. So I think possibly we could ask our clerk to, and we'll take away an action to consider what other what other information and confidence can be imparted through this committee to the wider council in respect of the security of our cybersecurity issues. I'll undertake to speak with the clerk and the team responsible for that. I don't know if Andrew, you want to comment at all on that. It's an area that you probably will know as well. And I've got Councillor Matthews with his hand up, so I welcome his comment. Perhaps we'll go to Councillor Matthews first.
Thank you, Chairman. I fully endorse Councillor Ginn's comments. There's been an awful lot of worrying activity in respect of that setup over the recent years and tremendous losses, etc. So I fully agree with him that it must be closely looked at to make sure that they're delivering the services in a proper manner.
Thank you, Councillor Matthews. Jackie Gooding.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. I don't know whether it would be helpful for the committee, but I would be happy to ask our Assistant Director who leads on the IT audit work to come and give a presentation to the committee about the cyber security work we'll be doing and what we'll be looking at. I don't know whether that would be beneficial or not prior to the audit taking place.
Well, that's I've got a number of thumbs up. That would be we'll be very grateful if that can be arranged. Yeah. We'll find that of interest. Thank you. We'll look to you to coordinate a date with Caroline, our clerk. Right. Any other comment, question? Councillor Balderson.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I just have two clarification points, if that's okay. The first one, just in relation to the COVID activities, I understand in our last report, the activities were grant funding, payment processes, funding leisure facilities, volunteer reimbursement. So I just wanted to check, are they now all going to be reported through into the grant funding schemes, small business grant fund, retail, hospitality and leisure grant fund reports? Sorry, a bit of a mouthful. Or are they going to be are they going to be reported back on in other reports? I just wanted to put the linkages in. Jackie, if you're able to.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. I did miss part of your question. My internet, sorry, just keep dropping out. But I think what you're asking was in relation to the work that was completed and in the last the work that was in the last progress report around the COVID-19 activities. Will that be reported? And the answer is yes, it will be reported when I bring you the annual opinion in September, and I'll also bring you a final update report on work that you haven't seen that has been completed for 2019-20.
Great, and that sort of nicely moves on to my second clarification point, because I know you did report, you've got the one report that you completed in this year's plan, but in last year's plan, during this period, you've completed 4 other audits, and I appreciate you're going to be reporting on those in September as well, but conscious that that is a couple of months away, I just wanted to ask a clarification point, whether there was any key findings or if there's any level of assurance or any findings that we should be aware of now and be considering prior to September, or whether that essentially were good results for audits.
Sorry, Councillor Bolton, I did miss most of that, so I couldn't quite. Sorry, it's my internet. What your internet keeps dropping out. So could you repeat the question again?
Yes, certainly. I appreciate that in this year's plan, you've just got one audit that has been completed, but in last year's plan, during this period, you've completed a further 4 audits, which you say you're going to report on in September. So, but I appreciate September is a number of months away. So I just wanted to see whether there was any level of assurance or key findings that you thought we should be aware of now rather than waiting until September.
That's a good point. I will have to go back and revisit the reports, but what I can do is I can provide a brief overview for you in an email to the committee if that's acceptable.
I'm sure that that'll be acceptable. The issue being if there was any significant concerns which were raised by those reports, we'd want to hear about them earlier rather than later, even though under the sort of scheme of things, we wouldn't normally hear about them until September. I'm conscious of time. I'm going to ask if the committee is content that we prolong for another. I'll ask for 30 minutes. I don't think it'll take us 30 minutes to conclude this morning's agenda, but can I have agreement to extend by 30 minutes? Do I need to take a vote on that? I've got a number of thumbs. No, I will extend by 30 minutes. Councillor Watson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was really just to pick up from what we were discussing around the corporate risk register, and Mr. Lovegrove was saying that about including an audit of the public health budget within the Q2, within the internal audit, and I'm wondering if that has to be a recommendation at this point, because it was something that we discussed about what Councillor Ginman said earlier, is that we talk about, oh yes, that's a really good idea, we could do this, but actually do we have to make it a recommendation so that it's actually work that we can put in? Could I have advice on that?
Mr. Lovegrove.
Thank you, Chair. I need to have a conversation with Jackie Gooding about putting into the plan, but that will be the normal process for adjusting the plan as we go through the year. So it's an emerging item that the committee.
So a recommendation. Sorry to interject. A recommendation could be that the committee requests that you consult with internal audit in respect of an audit of the public health budget. Can we capture that, Caroline? Thank you. Are there any other comments, points under this agenda item?
Chair, I have a couple that I don't know if you want them as actual recommendations.
Right.
So
let's hear them.
The first one is the chairperson work with the clerk and the IT team in Hoople in connection with providing assurance with regard to the council's cybersecurity. That may not be quite worded, but I think that was the gist of the conversation. The second recommendation that a presentation from the IT auditor at SWAP be commissioned in connection with cybersecurity generally. A brief overview from SWAP in connection with the 2019-2020 audit to provide assurance to the committee about any key findings in advance of September 2020's meeting. And the committee requests that the Chief Finance Officer consult with internal audit in respect of an audit of the public health budget.
I'm happy with all of those. Can we put those, as it were, to the vote, just to have agreement of everybody that we've captured everything? I think we've Councillor Balderson?
Yes, approve.
Councillor Bolter?
Yes, approve, Chair.
Councillor Ginman?
Yes, approve.
Councillor Matthews?
Approve. Councillor
Toynbee?
Approve.
Councillor Watson?
Approve.
And I approve. Councillor Shaw. Thank you for that. Item 10, the National Code of Conduct consultation. This is to consider whether a council response should be submitted in respect of the current National Model Code of Conduct consultation being undertaken, I think, by the LGA. And Claire, you've put a paper to us on that. If you'd like to just say a few words, I think what is interesting, certainly to me and possibly to the members of the committee, are where you've highlighted any differences between our current code of conduct, which is one that this committee, I think, has recommended to council and council's adopted, and what's proposed in a national code of conduct. Although I understand and appreciate that we don't have to adopt any national code, but I suspect that we will refer to it as and when we come to review our county Herefordshire Code of Conduct.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, as my report sets out, this comes out of the Committee for Standards in Public Life, which recommended and saw the problems with there not being a national code. We see that sometimes locally within parish and town councils and our own code where they haven't adopted it. So there certainly is a need, I think, for consistency. But what I've tried to do is, because we've done so much work in this council about having a code that is proactive, that upholds good standards. We're not one of these councils who still has, you know, a code that was from 2012, which still a lot of councils have. What I've tried to do is not lead you at all, but just try to do that comparison against what our code has done over the last couple of years. And actually, I think in some areas that I've identified, this code doesn't go far enough. So, for example, in relation to closed groups, it's not included. Gifts and hospitality, I think it's absolutely excellent that we have it in our register. It's really clear, it doesn't get lost. So I actually do think there are some points from Herefordshire that we should be making. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, I've got Councillor Toynbee. We have a suggested response, which is helpful, and it contains really the reflection of our current code. Councillor Toynbee.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, I don't know. Yeah, it's been really interesting reading about this and reflecting on the code of conduct, and I'm really pleased that we have got a record of being proactive on it. And thank you to the Solicitor of the Council for drafting this suggested response on behalf of this committee, which I assume you drew up in consultation with the independent persons and some councillors who, was that right?
I've taken views of the independent persons, which are included. I haven't included any councillors. All we have done is we've sent it out to all councillors as a separate email. Yeah. And obviously come to this committee.
Okay, thanks. So everybody's had an opportunity to feed into this, yeah.
Yeah, and every councillor has their opportunity to obviously individually put their own views as well.
Yeah, that's really great. And setting aside the fact that question 3, as you may have noticed, is grammatically completely nonsensical, never mind about that. It's almost impossible to answer. So as you said, the main differences between the model and our proposed code seems to be, as you said, about membership of organisations, and I totally back your suggestions on that, because I think we need to go way beyond the bare minimum, and I know that the public are, take a close interest in this. Understandably, I think it's really important that we're as transparent as possible, and I support going as far as possible on this beyond the bare minimum. So I agree with your suggestion on that. And it seems to me that the other main difference is that we want the code to have more teeth. Is that right? And I just want to say that I totally support that as well. It's not enough to just say, let's all be polite to each other. And, you know, if you overstep the mark, you've got to sit out a few meetings. So basically, I support your suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the issue with teeth is really, it's quite interesting when they talk through the questionnaire about, you know, should we have principles or rules? And our approach at the moment, we have two approaches. We have the principles but rules against it, so that we have some flexibility, but we're really clear what our minimum standards are. So I think that's good, but actually sanctions, which are the real teeth, would need a change of legislation. I believe the LGA are pushing for that. They are lobbying for that change to, I think, go in line with a new national code at the same time.
So we have very few powers for as far as sanctions are concerned then?
Absolutely.
Or none?
Well, the recommendations are apologies, I could recommend to a group leader that they remove someone from a committee, but that's not within my control. The real sanction, if I'm honest, is going through the process, which I don't think for any councillor is attractive. It is a formal process. It's and also we publish decisions. That's the only real deterrent, if I'm honest. I think training's really good. I think nipping things in the bud is far better. So training, raising matters with group leaders, etc. But as far as penalties, it really is publication. That's the only real penalty.
Very limited. Councillor Ginman.
Yeah, just to reinforce Solicitor's comment that, because having been involved in regulation in other areas, the moment you put penalties in, you have to have appeal processes, you start to get legal representation, and the costs not only to the body but to the individual are considerable. And therefore, Parliament has always been very careful in how far it's gone with suggesting there should be that sort of power. It is a very difficult one, which does rely so heavily upon the individual policing themselves in their own behaviours. To that end, I would agree with Councillor Toynbee's comments previously, totally in support of the suggestions of that the solicitor has put forward, particularly with regard to bodies and memberships and so on. I think to be completely open, and that allows, that shouldn't stifle the ability of the individual, but at least people understand background, and there are right and proper ways of handling that in any one committee. So I'm totally highly supportive of that, being as open as we can in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Balderson.
Yeah, I think that I would agree as well. And I think we're taking a more conservative approach. And for example, the gift limit in the register is 25, but we're doing it 20. So I think we're a lot more conservative in our approach, and I agree with that. The one question I did have, Claire, was in relation to question 9. To what extent do you support the definition of bullying and harassment used in the code in a local government context? I do note that one of the independent persons put to a moderate extent, and the other independent person, from what I can gather, is probably supporting a to moderate extent as well. But I think in your response, you've put to a great extent. So I just wanted to understand your thought process behind that, because other than that, I thought that I would agree with everything that you've put in.
Yeah. This comes across because we included a definition of bullying and harassment as soon as we could when the Standards of Public Life gave their recommendations, and it include a definition of bullying and harassment. We did it straight away. So that's why I've said we lead on this. We think it's really important. That's my reason why for including it.
I think yeah, a lot of issues arise relating to that area as well, as has been the situation.
So sorry, can I just clarify that? Because I thought the survey was saying to what extent do we support their definition in their code, but we're saying we go beyond that.
No, we use the same definition. We did what they're recommending. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that. We've got 2 recommendations. A, that the council committee consider whether a council response to the National Code of Conduct consultation be submitted. I'm suggesting yes, we do. And if the if the committee approves a council response to this, Solicitor Council be authorised to submit one by the deadline of the 17th of August. So can we just approve those recommendations? Councillor Balderson.
Sorry, Chairperson. I think Councillor Watson may have had her hand up. I'm not quite sure. She's just put it down, but I was.
Sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, I was.
Sorry,
just,
Councillor Watson.
Yeah, sorry,
before
I don't want to extend the debate or the
No, that's fine.
conversation, and it was really just to pick up two issues for me, and it was fully supporting what's been said by my colleagues. The other issue is around I'm not quite sure how to say it really, is that my understanding when a complaint is made is that at the moment, when a complaint is made about a councillor's behaviour within a committee, it seems to be like a formal complaint. But is there a system, and I apologise for this, Claire, in advance if I've not read it fully, that that there are options available where we can nip it in the bud and not make it such a big issue, but actually deal with it through those committees. So say, for instance, if a member of the public thinks that a councillor behaved in breach of the code of conduct, that they could go to the chair of that committee to complain, or to their political group leader before actually making a formal complaint. I just think that it gives an opportunity for mediation as well between the complainant and the the councillor, or
I think it's really important when upholding the code and the standards that matters are dealt with informally. So often I might observe something in a committee, a chair might observe something in a committee or on email, and matters are dealt with without a formal complaint. But where a member of the public writes in or makes contact with a chair, I'm absolutely certain it would come to me because it's formal at that stage. So that's the difference, is that the formal process kicks then into this standards procedure, but certainly that's only part of the role.
Yeah, okay. So it's really picked up by the chair at that point. So if they see that breach, that, because that's my understanding too, is that, but I'm really glad that we're having this conversation.
Absolutely. Nolan principle leadership, that's where you challenge bad behaviour where you see it. And I say bad behaviour, but behaviour that is in breach of the code. It's actually a duty on everyone, not just the chair.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is a process through group leaders for councillors to comment on other councillors' behaviours, and that sort of outside, that's before anything goes to being a formal complaint made, and that usually is a way of just clearing the air.
Yeah, and thank you. Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you for that.
Okay.
And the other, the other issue, sorry, Chair, is about harassment and bullying, and I'm really glad that that has also been looked at, because having been bullied and harassed and cyber stalked this year, is that it's really made me aware about there is quite a slight difference between the various stages. So I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Watson, for those comments. If I can just ask committee to vote on the recommendations as laid. Councillor Balderson?
Approve.
Councillor Bolter?
Approve.
Councillor Ginman?
Approve.
Councillor Matthews?
Approve.
Councillor Toynbee?
Approve.
Councillor Watson?
Approve.
And Councillor, I approve. Councillor Shaw. Thank you for that. And just to say thank you to Claire for dealing with that and providing us with some model answers. I think that was an excellent way of dealing with that questionnaire. Item 11, the work programme update, last item on the agenda. Let's get anything anybody wants to raise in respect of that. Obviously, I think our next meeting is the 22nd of September. There might well, I think, be one or two items being brought to that meeting. Caroline, you might know of any other additional items being brought.
Yes, Chair. The only potential report that may be forthcoming with the committee's agreement is a possibility of a change to the Constitution being recommended in respect of the licensing subcommittee's functions. There's been some statutory guidance issued in respect of private hire and hacking carriages, and there are some recommendations in there that have implications for issues in relation to those particular areas moving into the licensing subcommittee functions rather than being dealt with solely by a taxi officer panel. Officers in licensing are working through that statutory
we'll look forward to those coming before us, I'm sure. Jackie Gooding, you've got your hand up. Was there something you wanted to?
Yes, thank you.
Sorry.
Trying to look for the unmute button. Just quickly to say that the annual opinion report is coming in September. On the programme it says November. Are the committee happy with that? The annual opinion report comes in September rather than November.
I'm looking at both Mr. Lovegrove and our clerk. Yeah, we've got thumbs up. Yes, I believe we would be happy to see that in September. Yes. Yeah, that's fine. No, Councillor Ginman and then Councillor Claire Ward.
Just to point out, there have been one or two things this morning where we've requested further information or meetings. I'm perfectly happy to leave that with you, Chair, to discuss and see how best to fit that into a programme. But those would be additional to that which we already have. Yes.
Claire Ward.
Just to update the committee on the progress of the working group for whistleblowing, the report and revised scheme went to the trade unions yesterday, what's called the JPF panel. Depending on the feedback from that panel, I might be able to bring the report and the new revised policy back to September, and I wouldn't want to wait a month because of diary commitments, if that's okay. It depends on the feedback from the trade unions, which I've given over the summer, but I may be able to meet that September date.
Thank you. Yeah, that'll be acceptable. Right. If there's no other comment, just remains for me to thank my committee and for all your input today, and to thank officers and those visiting officers, as it were, for like Jackie Gooding from SWAP, for their contributions. As I say, the next meeting is on the 22nd of September, but we will have some training sessions that we'll try and get some advance notice of, and some dates that the majority of us can attend for the subjects raised. So just to say thank you again, and can we turn off the